Clara had once imagined marriage as a long, winding conversation, one that evolved with time, deepened with age. But after 25 years, her home echoed with silence. Her husband, Richard, sat across from her each night at the dinner table, mechanically chewing his food, eyes often fixed on the television behind her head. They rarely fought. They simply coexisted. At 48, Clara found herself invisible in her own life. Her days were a loop of laundry, silent coffee, and half-read novels that failed to hold her attention. She had taken a part-time job at the city library more out of necessity than passion. The books no longer thrilled her, but shelving them gave her purpose, a quiet reprieve from the vacuum of her domestic life. Richard hadn't always been this way. He used to write her notes, warm her hands in winter, and whisper ideas for weekend getaways. But somewhere between mortgage payments, aging parents, and life's predictable grind, they lost each other. Now, he seemed like a tired man wrapped in routine, and she, an afterthought in his world of financial reports and reheated dinners. One rainy Thursday, Clara noticed someone new at the library. A young man, mid-20s, perhaps, stood at the poetry shelf, thumbing through a worn copy of Neruda. He had the lean awkwardness of youth, a soft jaw shadowed with stubble, and an easy confidence that made him stand out in the hushed aisles. She didn't expect him to speak. "Do you think love changes, or just fades?" he asked without looking up. Caught off guard, Clara blinked. "I think it hides beneath routine. Disappointment. Fear." He smiled. "That's a better answer than I expected." His name was Ethan. He was a literature student at the local university, doing research on romantic poets. Over the next few weeks, he returned regularly. Each time, their conversations grew longer, winding from poetry to philosophy, books to broken dreams. Clara began looking forward to Thursdays. She would choose a brighter blouse, wear lipstick she hadn't touched in years. She told herself it was nothing, an intellectual friendship. A harmless exchange between generations, but deep down, something stirred. Something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't Ethan's age or his charm, it was the way he listened. As if her words mattered. As if she mattered. One evening, as the library lights dimmed and Ethan packed his notebook, he paused by the front desk. "We're starting a small reading group, poetry and discussion. You'd be perfect for it," he said, eyes sincere. "If you're interested." Clara hesitated. The clock read 7:58 p.m. Richard would already be home, heating leftovers. She nodded. "Maybe." As she locked up and stepped into the night, Clara felt the raindrops on her skin. They were cold, but she was awake. She didn't know what she wanted yet. Only that something in her had begun to flicker, and flickers, when fed, can grow. The first meeting of Ethan's poetry circle took place in the sunlit back room of a quiet cafe. Clara arrived 10 minutes early, nerves buzzing beneath her calm exterior. She told Richard she had volunteered for a late shift at the library. It wasn't a lie. Just not the whole truth. Ethan greeted her warmly, his smile unguarded, genuine. There were 4 others in the group, students mostly, yet Clara felt as though the room revolved around her. He introduced her not as a guest, but as a brilliant mind who sees beneath the words. No one had called her brilliant in years. They read Rilke, dissected longing, and debated the shape of love in modern times. Clara listened more than she spoke, but when she did, Ethan locked onto her words as though they held secrets only he could decipher. That night, walking back to her car, Clara noticed the way her chest fluttered, not with guilt, but with aliveness. It had been so long. Soon, the meetings became weekly. She told herself it was about the literature, the community, the escape. But with each passing Thursday, her heart grew more entangled in something she dared not name. Ethan began texting her between sessions, quotes from poems, thoughts about the universe, and sometimes just, "thinking of you." At first, she didn't reply. Then she did. Slowly. Cautiously. At home, Richard remained unchanged. He still kissed her forehead each morning, still forgot to ask how her day had been. Clara began noticing things, how he never looked her in the eye anymore, how their dinners passed in silence even as her mind buzzed with words she never spoke aloud. She wondered when they had stopped seeing each other as people and started seeing each other as roles, husband, wife. Habit. One night, after a session, Ethan walked her to her car. The parking lot was quiet, scattered with lamplight and shadows. He paused before she opened the door. "You make the room feel full," he said. "Like there's more to breathe." Clara froze. The air felt charged, intimate. Too intimate. She looked away, willing herself to remember who she was, what this was. "I'm married, Ethan," she said softly, as if reminding herself more than him. "I know," he replied. "That doesn't mean I don't see you." She didn't sleep that night. Her phone glowed once. "I hope you got home safe." She stared at it for hours before deleting the message, but something had shifted. The boundary between right and wrong had blurred, and she was standing in the mist. Still, she returned the next week. Clara told herself she could stop at any time. That this was still innocent, an emotional detour, not a betrayal. But lies told in quiet repetition began to sound like truth. She began seeing Ethan outside the poetry group. First, a midday coffee near the university. Then, a walk through the botanical gardens. Always in public, always with plausible excuses. But her heart beat louder with each encounter. There was a lightness to Ethan, an earnestness untouched by life's erosion. He spoke of dreams as if they were destinations, not disappointments. Around him, Clara shed layers she didn't realize she wore: wife, caretaker, invisible woman. With him, she felt seen, desired, alive, and yet, the more she lit up in Ethan's world, the more dim her home life became. Richard had begun to notice. Not with suspicion, but with confusion. One evening, as they sat through another silent meal, he looked up, not through her, but at her. "You seem different," he said quietly. Distant. Clara looked down at her plate, unsure how to answer. Guilt gnawed at her, but not enough to make her stop. She told Ethan they needed space, that she was feeling overwhelmed. He didn't argue. He just said, "I understand. But I'll be here if you need me." Days passed. Then a week. The quiet returned, heavier than ever. One afternoon, Clara found a poem slipped into a book at the library, Ethan's handwriting. It wasn't romantic. It was raw, aching, full of longing left unsaid. She read it twice, then tucked it into her purse. That night, she stood in the hallway outside her bedroom, listening to the hum of the television, the clink of Richard's glass on the table. She felt miles away from the man she had once loved, and from the woman she had once been. She went to Ethan. They met in the park, beneath a canopy of bare trees. It was cold, breath visible in the air, hands buried in pockets. They sat on a bench, not speaking for several minutes. Finally, Clara turned to him. "This, whatever it is, it can't continue." Ethan's eyes didn't leave hers. "I wasn't going to ask you for anything. I just wanted to feel this, even if it doesn't go anywhere." Clara's throat tightened. There was affection in his words, but also pain. And still, no pressure, no demands. Only the weight of possibility. He reached out, brushing her hand with his fingertips. She didn't pull away. For a moment, they stayed there, two souls suspended in the pause before a choice. Then she stood. "I need to go," she whispered. That he nodded. She didn't look back. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. Clara returned to her routines, but everything had changed. The spaces once filled by longing were now occupied by consequence. She didn't see Ethan again. He didn't message, didn't visit the library. It was as if he understood her silence for what it was, a boundary drawn too late but drawn nonetheless. Still, echoes of him lingered. The cadence of his voice when quoting Neruda. The way he waited for her thoughts, not just her presence. She missed him, but more than that, she missed who she had become in his light. That at home, Richard was trying subtle things. He'd ask about her day and wait for the answer. He started leaving his phone in the kitchen during dinner. One night, he cooked, an awkward attempt, but sincere. Clara noticed. And resented herself for noticing. One evening, as they folded laundry in silence, she spoke. "Do you ever wonder what happened to us?" she asked. Richard paused. "Every day." She looked at him, really looked, for the first time in months. He looked older, softer, uncertain. There was something vulnerable in his stillness, like he'd been waiting for that question all along. "I felt invisible," she confessed. "Like I disappeared somewhere between the bills and the years." He nodded slowly. "I know. I saw it happening. I just didn't know how to stop it." The honesty didn't heal them, but it opened a window. They sat that night without the television, without distractions. Just two people, stripped of performance, facing the quiet truth between them. Later that week, Clara wrote a letter to Ethan. She didn't send it, she thanked him, not for the attention or the affection, but for reminding her she was still capable of feeling. Still capable of being more than what she had settled into. Then she folded it, tucked it inside a book of poems, and shelved it at the library. A silent goodbye. Over time, things didn't return to how they were. But something began again. Clara and Richard started walking together after dinner. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes not. The silence no longer felt like absence, but space. In her journal, Clara wrote, "I was searching for someone to rescue me from emptiness. But the truth is, I needed to rescue myself, from silence, from neglect, from fear. And maybe, from the idea that love should always feel like the beginning." She stood by the window one morning, coffee in hand, watching the world stir to life. No grand revelations. Just breath, and light, and a second chance.